Greetings to you all, and I am so excited to start a journey together into the world of Shakespeare. I will tell you a little bit about myself and then go over my learning goals for this class. I'm doing a video just so you have something to look at, whatever this is. Feel free to turn me off. I'm going to basically be reading notes as if we were in a lecture in a classroom, so I'll be doing this a lot. And I'm so excited. And then I'll go over the readings assigned for this week and point out a few things you can look for within the readings, and then we'll be on our way. So my name is Kate Eastwood Norris, and I have been a professional actor for over 25 years and a teacher for about 15. And yes, I have performed a lot of Shakespeare. About 12 or 13 years ago, I began feeling a need to dive a little deeper into the art of theater. I felt like I had mastered how to do it, but I wanted to learn more about why I do it. And I found myself applying for the Track X program at some place called Pacifica Graduate Institute. And at Pacifica, I learned that theater is not only a powerful tool for audiences to engage their entire psyche, but is also one for the actor. Archetypal energy, the transcendent function, how symbols operate within our psyche, looking at theater through the many lenses of the humanities, which Pacifica offers you, the power of story, the ritualistic event known as theater, and so many elements native to depth psychology all proved to be fundamental to my understanding of theater. And this was a reciprocal relationship. I found that the practice of theater was fundamental to my understanding of depth psychology. And the latter will be our focus in this class. To explain, this class will focus heavily on arts-based research or research through creative practice or whatever fancy academic term that is essentially called learning by doing, whatever you want to call it. Now, this is not a class on acting, though we will be doing some. It is a class that is trying to use the art of theater to understand how the psyche works by activating all levels of the psyche, something very appropriate to Jungian thought, since that is what old C.G. did himself when formulating his own theories. We will engage in this exploration through the scripts of one particular playwright who is particularly suited to the task, William Shakespeare. Now, I do not know your personal relationship to Shakespeare. Some of you may be actors and are comfortable with the whole enterprise. Some of you may have favorite plays of his and attend the theater often. Some of you may think Shakespeare and just hold up your arm in a sort of declamatory manner and say his name in a British accent like Shakespeare, and feel as though it's highfalutin art and that it's good for you like broccoli. And you want to like it, but the language is just too weird. Others may have had Julius Caesar, for instance, forced down their throat in high school and still can't get that bad taste out of your mouth. And many of you might be like my uncle, adamant that he hates Shakespeare and always will never attend one of my performances, even if I gave him free tickets and begged him on my knees just to give it a try. But here you are in this class, and so you have to give it a try, and I am so happy for you. Because the world of Shakespeare is something that once you have glimpsed the possibilities and opportunities it offers, your life will be enriched and your study of depth psychology greatly enhanced. But why Shakespeare? Not because he was considered by some to be the greatest poet that ever walked the blah, 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 blah. That puts Shakespeare on a pedestal, and I am determined to knock him off it. His legendary status is due not only to the lasting reverberance of his plays and characters, but also in a large part to British people who purposefully elevated him for a sense of national prestige and a way to make a buck. So here's a bust of Shakespeare behind me, and here's one of my husband's hats. Okay, so the preciousness of the man is not what the focus of this class is. Watch this space for what occurs to Shakespeare gets on his head as this class commences. Who knows what we will find. He was not perfect. He was not some sort of angel who graced the earth with his presence for brief but lucky time. He was a white man, and now he's a dead white man, perhaps the person we least need to elevate at this time. Now, he was alive in a primarily white country in the 1500s and a little bit of the 1600s. It's safe to assume that he was racist. He's a white man. It's safe to assume he operated both consciously and unconsciously within his privileges as a male member of the society. All signs that point to giving him a big old cancel today. He also apparently cheated on his wife, and some say he was a Catholic spy. Some say he was a homosexual. Others say he was just a two-bit son of a Glover and never wrote these plays at all. It's impossible to know exactly what he was like. We can only imagine him in what we know of his society and piece together some old letters or reviews and come to some sort of very subjective conclusion. Also, he was not the iconic legend today that he is today when he was alive. He was just another playwright among many, known primarily for his history plays, and was struggling to make a buck and keep his theater alive. And if his contemporary, for instance, Christopher Marlowe, had had a group of friends publish his collected works in one big volume after his death, who knows? Maybe we would be having an engaged Marlowe class instead of an engaged Shakespeare class. So, why are we studying him? Because he offers an incredible opportunity for the student of depth psychology. Quite simply put, it is because of how deeply and efficiently his work both explains and engages the psyche. To study Shakespeare is to study how archetypal energy is personified, how it motivates, how it reverberates, how it suffuses and activates our deepest levels of the psyche, both as a performer and an audience member. Whether you are a fan or not, when exploring the psyche, the sheer number of illuminating characteristics that Shakespeare's work possess, combined with the requirements of the medium, theater, for which he crafted them, all serve to offer a deep and engaged perspective. Mythic plots, where characters that operate as personified archetypal energy, who are themselves human enough to be subject to that energy, are speaking a language consisting of symbols, poetry, metaphor within the medium of theater with its rituals and engagement of the imagination, all can enlighten our search as explorers of the soul. Yet I do not pose the opportunity for education as the only reason a person of color, especially, or any other marginalized group might find worth or access in Shakespeare. I offer another reason, and it originates within the strategy taken by practitioners of theater today. More and more in theater over the last few decades, we are seeing people of color in typically white roles. And at first, this was a tentative, safe nod towards diversity. The actor, say a black actor, spoke in standard American dialect, meaning the dialect of mid-Atlantic white people, and just happened to be a person of color. But now we are seeing these actors of color actually play their color, be themselves, insert their own experience, embrace regional dialects, and examine the ramifications of their race within the play, not just gloss over it and act like it isn't there. The questions became then, how can this play reveal the experience of the marginalized instead of make them disappear even more within it? How does this casting change the play, our feelings about certain characters? We're also seeing gender roles expand. Women can play men, or typical male roles can be made female. I just played Hamlet as a woman, as in Princess Hamlet, and Hamlet had a lesbian relationship with Ophelia. Now, what does that do to the play? And I've also played Richard III as a man. And what does that sort of casting bring out in the play? What does that do to the story? And what does that do to the people performing or watching it? These are fascinating questions, and Shakespeare's plays can hold up to these questions because the stories are, in the end, about humanity, not about its author. It's an exciting time in theater. Once we open back up again. It's pretty dull right now, but theater makers are owning Shakespeare's plays. They're taking advantage of the paradoxes, not faithfully reproducing museum pieces. And I want you to embrace this as well, to claim Shakespeare, to wrest him away from the clutches of white high culture, pinky extended elite. Feel free to knock him off his pedestal and to feel that you, no matter who you are or what your background is, have the right to think about, read, speak, and inhabit his words however you darn well please. Because, of course, you do. So why Shakespeare? Because of this uniquely rich opportunity, Shakespeare's plays offer you to learn about and experience the psyche. And perhaps because of that opportunity, you can, and I hope, will bring every single part of you, race and gender included, to the experience. Now I'm going to move on now to an overview of the readings you have for this week, because I only have so much time allowed for this lecture, and I will make them shorter, I promise. But I want to acknowledge that this very brief one-sided conversation about race and gender need not be the end. I'm so willing and excited to speak further with any of you who choose to reach out to me. So call me, email me, we can Zoom, whatever. Let's talk. Please know your experience is my greatest concern, and I will do everything in my power to help you have the greatest experience. So, Shakespeare, not Shakespeare, but just Shakespeare. We've knocked him off his pedestal a bit, so you may be wondering why I've included Harold Bloom's introduction to his book, Shakespeare, the Invention of the Human, in this module's readings. He begins with the following: the answer to the question why Shakespeare must be, who else is there? He goes on to call Shakespeare the founder of a secular religion and states over and over again that Shakespeare is the greatest writer in the history of the world. Now, Harold Bloom is a Shakespearean scholar, so it is in his best interest to be studying the greatest writer in the history of the world. But whatever you think about the truth of Shakespeare's greatness, his influence on our culture is undeniable. After waxing poetic about the ways in which Shakespeare permeates our lives, what Bloom is really struggling with, I think, is trying to pinpoint why. He has a very interesting idea that Shakespeare's characters are so well known, so embedded in our cultures, that they are in a sense alive, even without us, and that they influence our interpretations of ourselves as much as we interpret them. Listen to this quote. He says, "The plays read me better than I read them, and we are lived by drives we cannot command, and we are read by works we cannot resist." Now, to anyone who has read Jung's Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, this sort of language sounds quite familiar, doesn't it? We are lived by drives we cannot command. It sounds a lot like archetypal energy and the way depth psychology thinks about art, doesn't it? And I want to call Harold Bloom and give him some Jungian vocabulary words to help him prove his point, or at least get him to read Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. He could maybe find a kindred spirit. There'll be quite a bit of scholarship like that, theater scholarship, in this class. Essays and chapters that flirt very closely with the theories you are here to study. And I think that's invaluable, to be able to recognize one mode of thought in another. This is how theater and depth psychology can speak to one another and answer each other's questions. So keep your eye out for these similarities as well as for the differences. This is a humanities degree, after all, and a multidisciplined approach to learning is what this degree is all about. Bloom drops a lot of character names into his intro. He's probably showing off. He mentions Hamlet and Falstaff the most. I think most of you are familiar with Hamlet, the introspective and grief-stricken and arguably mad prince of to be or not to be. Falstaff, on the other hand, is this great, fat, drunken hedonist in the Henry plays, and he's basically vitality incarnate. For all the rest of the characters, don't worry about it if you don't know them. You might come to know some of them by the end of this class. Just read for the essence of the introduction, Why Shakespeare Endures, according to this one man, Harold Bloom. Next, we come to a chapter in a book by Dr. Ralph Cohen. It's called Shakespeare and How to Cure It, the complete handbook for teaching Shakespeare. Now, to be transparent, Ralph is a dear friend of mine. He has directed me in many plays, came to my wedding, and is partly responsible for why I'm a teacher. His love of Shakespeare is infectious, and he, like I do, seek to share that love with everyone we meet. His chapter addresses what he calls the 7 deadly preconceptions about Shakespeare that keep both teachers and students from fully engaging in the work. Now, this book is written for teachers who are often quite honestly, intimidated by the idea of teaching Shakespeare to students. And Ralph wants them to overcome what he calls their Shakespeare, or he knows their students never will. I'm giving you this chapter because we're all adults here, and the spirit and manner of Ralph's strategy is, to me, highly efficient, and it just might undo whatever damage your reading of Harold Bloom does. So read and learn. And then we dip into Stephen Mullaney's book, The Reformation of Emotions in the Age of Shakespeare. Now, we will come back to this book a few times in this class. It's recently published and full of a fascinating approach to Shakespeare. Do you remember when earlier I was talking about the paradoxes within Shakespeare's plays, that the plays operate very specifically according to the time, so society of the time period in which they were written, as well as broadly, universally accompanying aspects of any time period? Well, this book is a look at specifically the time period in which Shakespeare lived. It was during what was called the Protestant Reformation, which took place during the 1500s and 1600s, when people like Martin Luther and John Calvin, helped along by Henry VIII, who wanted a divorce, began to question the almighty control of and ideology of the Catholic Church. An immense period of unrest was born from this, with the national religion and all its accompanying rules changing again and again. Spirituality naturally suffered. The people as a collective were deeply affected by this, and Mullaney looks to art, specifically theater, to find out how much and in what way this affected the Elizabethan populace. He's very concerned with emotions, the scholarship of cognitive ecology, and what he calls the structures of feeling. He regards emotions as inhabiting a liminal space. He calls them boundary phenomena, and that they, quote, apprehend aspects of our lives that are hard to think in disciplinary and theoretical discourses, which suggests that the emotions are themselves a form of lived theory, a way of seeing and understanding the world around us that can't necessarily be accomplished by any other means, end quote. Now here, your depth psychological ears are probably perking up, and they should be. Explaining the unexplainable is a constant concern of depth psychology. And so much of what you will come across in this degree is how creativity exists to explain it. It exists to do exactly that. Mullaney's focus is on how theater specifically did that for the Elizabethans. Now, one focus of this class will be on how Shakespeare can do that for you. Mullaney's goal is to find out more about people in England during that time, rather than to focus on how theater does that for us today. But I chose this book not only because it's good to know what sort of world Shakespeare was living in when he wrote his plays, but mostly because the unrest in England during the 1500s somewhat mirrors our own. Our own society is in turmoil, right? I am recording this lecture on the Thursday after Election Day, which means we still don't know who's going to be president of the United States. Our spirituality is suffering. We're experiencing a plague, and so did they. So the notion of our mortality makes us need spirituality more than ever. But everything is in flux, and instability is the new stable. So again, we come back to the universal, but this time through the idea of shared specifics. And then finally, you have the introduction from the Arden, your hefty tome on Shakespeare's complete works. This has the dates and nuts and bolts of Shakespeare's life nicely laid out for you. It describes the theater scene, gives some small biography, and asks why Shakespeare, and gives a pretty thoughtful answer. The print is very small, so buy a magnifying implement and get a good light to read by. I promise your entire experience will be much better. Now, what I have said in this lecture, that this lecture will be about on the syllabus for this week's module and what it actually was about are somewhat different, as you may have noticed. I will get back to all the topics listed in this module as we move through the course, but the readings for this module certainly address many of those topics listed on the syllabus. But after I turned the syllabus in, I realized just how much I wanted and felt I truly needed to take the time to address the dead white man issue. So again, I understand that this is a whole huge conversation, and I would love to get into it further with any of you if you like. My goal as instructor of this class is, of course, to study depth psychology through the art of theater, but also to give you the tools to find your own access and affinity to the work of a pretty talented playwright. So that's all for this week. I'll see you next week in a much shorter lecture, and thank you so much.